Hi, Drama 15. My name is Horace Sandoval. I'm here to discuss with you all the character development in the play Our Enemies. A little bit about Our Enemies. It's a play that deals with Muslim stereotypes and the way the fellow Muslims actually deal with it. Kind of the way there's for and against, changing the views of others. A lot of characters in the story develop to be very different from where they started, and so I'm going to start by discussing Jamal. He's a very big character in the play. He's a very devoted and proud Muslim. Now, he does acknowledge that stereotypes of his culture and people back home do have some truth to them, but he doesn't feel that slandering them the way that Mosin and Alfani do is beneficial to his culture. He doesn't feel like that's going to help at all. And he just kind of feels that Mosin and Sheikh Alfani are kind of hateful and embarrassed of their own kind, of their own people. And so Jamal wants them to know that. He kind of goes on a whole binge of what he believes are brave and heroic acts. The way he goes to Mosin on before he goes on air and pretends to be the makeup guy and just completely makes him look like a fool, writes horror on his face, and while he's doing that, he's also discussing his own thoughts about his books, which is how Mosin goes about slandering Muslim people with his stories that he has in his books, which are all just mainly make Muslim culture and their way back home in Cairo just seem like it's a dictatorship. The way that he tells stories about the one with the taxi driver, and and so Jamal goes ahead and makes him look like a fool before he goes on air without him knowing. And then again with Sheikh Alfani, Sheikh Alfani is doesn't write books, but he's the leader of a mosque, and he has a lot of airtime on news outlets, and he kind of just goes about discussing the way it is back home and the way that Muslims believe. Like he had this whole interview, and there was questions about how Muslims felt about gay marriage and just homosexual couples, and he said that Muslims find it to be disgusting or something in that manner. And so Jamal feels like the Sheikh Alfani and Mosin saying these type of things against their people just embarrasses them, and just kind of fuels the hate that people have towards the Muslim, or fuels the fear that people have against Muslims. And so he feels that they're just selling out to the American people, that they're basically the puppets to the American people, because he thinks that they're just using them, which, I mean, he has maybe some truth to it. Later on in the play, you see Jamal go back to his girlfriend Noor, or who was his girlfriend at the time, and Noor is an aspiring writer who gets interviewed by Olivia, which is the main editor for the book company that Mosin actually works for. And so he goes back to her and tells her about his whole acts of courage and everything. With the Sheikh Alfani, he throws a cake in his face after discussing, basically telling him that he looks like a fool and then he's embarrassing his people. And later, you find that Mosin is upset and sees a picture of both Noor and Jamal together, because Noor is attempting to get a book published by them, so she has her whole profile and portfolio there. So he sees a picture, and eventually Olivia invites Noor to a dinner, and Mosin happens to be there. And the dinner is basically to convince Noor to write for them. But Noor is skeptical to write for them because she doesn't want to be like Mosin. She don't want to write about her people, and that's what they're pushing for. She doesn't want to write about. She don't want to seem stereotypical in her writing about the Muslim people. And so eventually Noor and Mosin get into an argument, and she gets a little drunk, and they end up going back to her place and have sex. The whole time Jamal is actually there, or he goes and comes back to her apartment. Um, Now, Noor had broken up with Jamal previously, but Jamal was determined to make it up to her because he just had this whole sense of courage after doing his acts of what he called bravery. And so he goes back while they're asleep and he sees them in bed together. And now they finally wake up. Mosin and Noor finally wake up, and Jamal confronts them. He seems a little calm at first, which is surprising because he's very, in the whole story, he's just kind of an angry person, especially towards Mosin. And he basically calls Mosin out, telling him that he only had sex with Noor to get back at him. And now Noor's saying that she only had sex with him because she was drunk, which could be true. But as well, she started kind of, when she heard that, she was kind of, when she tried to ask Mosin about it, you could tell that she was kind of hurt. But in the end of that situation, Mosin doesn't confirm that he did it to get back at him, and then everybody kind of leaves. And then so going back to the character development of Jamal, in the end, he kind of leaves the scene, goes back to being about Noor, and he comes back at the end after Noor finally gets her book published, and he kind of wants to apologize to her. He gets her book signed by her, and so he basically tells her that he's been going to a psychiatrist, which he later finds out why he's so angry. Apparently, it's a whole thing about sexual frustration, and so he's a changed man after that. He went to Noor to try to apologize to everything he's done, the way he's wronged her in their whole relationship, and Noor is kind of weirded out by it. She's not used to that type of Jamal. She's not used to the Jamal who's against the Muslim people, and so she wants Jamal to be the same. But Jamal he likes who he is now. He feels like happier. He's not so stressed. He's not so angry anymore, which is good. And so that's why he goes in order to make up. And then he leaves after that. And then he tries to go back to apologize to Alfani for throwing a cake in his face. And then there's another character development with Hani. He goes to try to make amends with Alfani. Their mosque had burned down previously while Al-Hani had gone to visit Egypt. And although it wasn't proven, there was some video footage of a man that looked like Jamal running from the scene. And so Hani automatically thought it was him because he thought he was back to hurt his father again. And so Hani actually ends up killing Jamal. It's kind of sad because Jamal has changed his ways and everything, but he gets stabbed in the stomach thinking, just from trying to make amends with Alfani. But, so that kind of leads me into Hani. So Hani is the Sheikh Alfani's son, and in the whole beginning of when Jamal goes up to Alfani and confronts him and throws a cake in his face, Hani just kind of stands there. He doesn't know what to do. He's kind of in shock at first, but he goes on and continues talking about how he's just afraid for his dad and he wants him to get security, and like he just feels like he's gonna go again. And then he takes his trip to Egypt to visit his family, and the whole trip is for him, from his dad's perspective, is for him to become a man. And he really becomes a man. He goes into Egypt and he spends time with his family, and he really enjoys the time that he gets. He really gets the family feel, but he also goes on and adventures out by himself a lot. And so that's where I feel like he finds himself truly. And then he gets news that his mosque was burnt down, his father's mosque was burnt down, and that his father barely escaped, and also that his mother is getting sick. And so Hani makes his flight back, and that's when he's confronted later on by Jamal, when Jamal was only just trying to apologize to his father. And that's where you kind of see how much Hani has developed. He's no longer kind of worried or scared. He's no longer in shock. He's no longer like too afraid to do anything. I mean, it's kind of a really big extreme, kind of going from just standing by watching his father get kicked to the face to stabbing and killing men. But that's how much he developed. So I'm really running out of time here, but those two, Jamal and Hani, definitely had the biggest character development. They changed so much throughout the whole story, and so I'm glad I had enough time to at least talk about them. And I just want to thank everyone for listening.